Imagine being underestimated your entire life, judged not for who you are, but for where you come from. That's exactly what happened to a humble gardener, who dared to fall in love with someone far beyond his supposed station. People laughed, whispered behind his back, and outright mocked him when he married a wealthy heiress. To them, it was a classic mismatch, a man with dirt-streaked hands and a woman born into luxury. They thought they knew how the story would end. They were wrong. As the years passed, those same critics watched in stunned silence as the couple's bond proved unshakable. The gardener wasn't just tending to plants here, was cultivating a legacy, one that would leave his doubters speechless. But how did he turn public ridicule into a victory that even the wealthiest couldn't ignore? Stay tuned, because this is a story of love, resilience, and the ultimate comeback, a tale that reminds us why you should never judge a book by its cover. Years passed, and life unfolded in ways no one, least of all the critics, could have predicted. The gardener, a man with quiet ambition and steady hands, had always been content with his work pruning, planting, and growing things from the soil that seemed to have a life of its own. To him, the world was simple, and the earth he worked with was a constant reminder of how everything had its place. But there was something more that people couldn't see. Beneath the dirt and calluses was a man of vision, a man who understood growth in ways many never would. The world around him saw only the dirt-streaked exterior, failing to recognize the layers of depth he possessed. And when the wealthy heiress entered his life, it only deepened the divide between him and the people who watched from the sidelines. They saw it as a transaction, a wealthy woman marrying a commoner. To them, it was a brief phase, a fleeting chapter in her life. The heiress, on the other hand, was tired of her world. She had been born into wealth, raised with the expectation of marrying someone of her own social standing. Yet despite everything her family had provided her, there was an emptiness that wealth couldn't fill. She had seen how the world could be cruel to those who were different or beneath others. Yet, in the gardener, she found not just warmth and kindness, but a deep understanding of the world around her that she had never known. His simplicity made her feel more alive, more real than she ever had. He didn't treat her like a prize to be won, but as a person, something rare in the circles she moved in. Her decision to marry him shocked everyone. The whispers started immediately. How could she possibly choose him? The gardener had no family, fortune, no title, no power. All he had were his hands, his heart, and his passion for nurturing the earth. What could he offer her except a life of simplicity, one far removed from the glittering world she was supposed to inherit? But she was resolute. In his eyes, she saw something that her wealth could never provide: honesty, warmth, and an undeniable connection. Her decision to marry him wasn't based on status, nor was it out of rebellion. It was out of love, pure and simple, yet misunderstood by so many. The first years of their marriage were blissful, but as they settled into their new life, the challenges began. The constant judgment from her family and friends grew louder. The heiress's relatives, deeply entrenched in their wealth and privilege, couldn't fathom what she saw in this man. They viewed him as an obstacle to their plans that were never meant to involve someone so ordinary. But what they didn't understand was that the gardener's world was not one of luxury, but one that held its own kind of quiet power. The first major setback came when the gardener's land was threatened. Developers wanted to buy up his property, intending to turn the natural, untouched land into a luxury. Development. The offer was large enough to retire on, enough to make life easier, but it would also destroy everything he had worked for, everything he believed in. The heiress was torn. On one hand, she wanted him to accept the offer, to make life easier for them both. On the other, she saw the value in his work, how deeply he believed in preserving the land. His decision wasn't just about money, it was about integrity. As tension mounted, the couple's bond was tested. His commitment to his land, his refusal to be swayed by money, puzzled her at first. How could he turn down an offer so large when it would secure their future? Was his work truly more important than their happiness? And yet, there was a sense of pride in him that she had come to admire. It was more than just stubbornness. It was a quiet, firm belief in the value of what he did. But as the days dragged on, the weight of their growing differences started to show cracks in their relationship. She was pulled in different directions by her family, by society, and by the life they had built together. Could their love truly withstand the pressure of these outside forces? Meanwhile, the gardener's reputation, already in shambles with the elitists, was beginning to make an unexpected turn. His knowledge of the land, his connection with nature, became more valuable than anyone could have imagined. Slowly, others began to take notice of his unique talents. The developers who had once attempted to buy him out found that his work in organic farming, sustainable practices, and natural landscaping were more lucrative than they had originally thought. A new form of wealth was emerging, one based on the very principles he had championed all along. But this shift wasn't immediate. At first, it was small local businesses and individuals began to request his services, intrigued by his approach to agriculture and the environment. But word began to spread, slowly at first, then rapidly as more influential people took notice of his innovative methods. His methods were sustainable, and they were profitable. The wealthy who once mocked him now found themselves scrambling to catch up, to understand how a simple gardener's approach had begun to reshape industries they had dominated for years. Meanwhile, the heiress stood by his side, her heart conflicted. She wanted to support her husband's dreams, but the world she knew, the world of wealth and power, seemed so far removed from the life they were now building. Could they continue to live in two different worlds? Her family continued to pressure her, urging her to return to her roots, to distance herself from the man they deemed beneath her. Every conversation with them felt like a tug of war, as her loyalty to her family conflicted with her love for her husband. And the tension between them, her world of privilege and his world of simplicity, only deepened with each passing day. The more success he found in his field, the more she felt like an outsider in his life, unsure of where she truly belonged. She wondered if her world would ever truly understand the man she had married, or if the rift between their two lives would only grow wider. One night, the gardener received an unexpected invitation to speak at a high-profile environmental conference. The offer was a game-changer. It would give him a platform to showcase his ideas to a global audience, potentially securing deals with companies and individuals who were now seeking sustainability. He had always dreamed of reaching this point, but it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about proving his worth, not just to the world, but to the people who had mocked him, who had written him off as nothing more than a simple gardener. But the invitation came with a price, an invitation to leave everything behind, to step into a world that was as foreign to him as the life of luxury had once been to the heiress. Could he truly leave the land he had worked so hard to cultivate, the life he had built with his wife, to chase something bigger? Something that could change the course of their future forever? With each passing day, the tension grew. The more the gardener rose in prominence, the more distant he and his wife became. Their paths were diverging in ways they hadn't anticipated, and yet they both knew the stakes had never been higher. What would become of their love story when the world around them seemed intent on pulling them in opposite directions? And in the distance, those who had once mocked him, the critics, the doubters, the ones who thought he would never amount to anything, watched with bated breath. They had underestimated him once, but could they really do it again? Their words, those mocking whispers that once echoed in the background, were growing louder. The gardener and his heiress had made it this far, but the question remained: could they survive what was coming next? The days leading up to the environmental conference were a blur. The gardener found himself torn between the life he had built, the quiet, humble life with his wife, and the new world that beckoned, offering fame, influence, and opportunity beyond anything he had ever imagined. He had spent years tending to the earth, cultivating not just plants, but ideas and principles that he believed in deeply. But now, faced with the chance to speak on a global stage, he wondered if it would mean losing touch with everything that had made him who he was. His wife, though supportive, could see the toll this decision was taking on him. It wasn't just about the opportunity, it was about what that opportunity would mean for their future. Would he return to the same man he had been, or would this new world change him in ways they couldn't predict? As his fame grew, so did the distance between them. He was no longer just the gardener from the small town they had once shared. He was a force to be reckoned with, sought after by investors, environmentalists, and even government leaders. The world was watching him, and that was something neither of them had fully prepared for. The night before the conference, they sat together in the small house they had built on the edge of the land that had once been threatened by the developers. The house was simple, just like the life they had chosen, but it held a warmth and comfort neither of them could find anywhere else. The gardener stared out the window at the fields, the same fields that had brought him ridicule all those years ago. He had nurtured this land with his own hands, and now it had become something far more than just a patch of earth. It was a symbol of everything he had fought for: his love, his work, and the future he dreamed of. His wife sat next to him, her hand resting gently on his. "Do you think we're ready for this?" she asked quietly, her voice filled with a mix of uncertainty and hope. "I don't know," he replied, his voice low. "But I know this. I've never been more certain of what I believe in, and I want to share that with the world." Her eyes softened, and she gave a small, reassuring smile. "Then you'll be amazing." But the doubt lingered. Would his rise to prominence be the beginning of something greater, or would it tear them apart? The world was so different now, and the path ahead was uncharted. They had both changed since the days when they had first met, and the weight of their choices was heavier than either of them could have anticipated. The next morning, the gardener stood at the podium, his heart pounding in his chest as he faced an audience of some of the most powerful people in the world. The room was filled with business tycoons, government officials, and environmental advocates, all gathered to hear what the simple gardener had to say. He had spent months preparing for this moment, but nothing could have fully prepared him for the gravity of it all. As he spoke, his words flowed with the same passion and conviction that had driven him to become the man he was today. He spoke not of wealth or power, but of sustainability, of the importance of nurturing the earth for future generations, and of the simple yet profound lessons he had learned from working the land. He didn't just talk about growing plants, he talked about growing communities, growing relationships, and growing hope for a better, more sustainable future. His message was raw and honest, unpolished, but undeniably powerful. For the first time, the people in the audience saw him not as the gardener, but as a visionary, someone who understood the delicate balance between nature and progress. His words struck a chord, resonating deeply with those who had come seeking answers to the world's environmental crises. The conference was a turning point not just for his career, but for how the world viewed him. But as the applause died down, the gardener couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He had shared his vision with the world, but there was still one question lingering in his mind. Was this enough? Could the work he had done, the life he had built, ever be enough to bridge the gap between him and the world he had once known? Could he ever fully reconcile the life he had chosen with the world that now called to him from every corner of the globe? When he returned home, his wife was waiting for him, her smile warm but her eyes filled with concern. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine curiosity. He took a deep breath, running his hand through his hair. "It went well." "Too well, maybe?" She raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? I don't know if I'm ready for this. The attention, the expectations. It's a lot more than I bargained for." She reached out, gently cupping his face in her hands. "You don't have to do it alone. You've never had to." He smiled, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. She was right. Through all of this, through the fame, the success, the challenges they had always been in it together. It wasn't just about the work. It was about the partnership they had built, the love they had nurtured through years of uncertainty. But as the days passed, the tension between their worlds began to resurface. His wife's family, who had never fully accepted him, began to push harder, urging her to return to her roots. They didn't understand what she had with them, gardener, nor did they care to. They wanted her back in the world they had promised her, a world of luxury and influence. They offered her everything she had once known: fame, money, and security. But they couldn't offer her what the gardener had: a love that had been tested, a life built on trust and shared dreams. One day, as the couple sat together in their garden, the gardener turned to his wife, his voice quiet but filled with determination. "I don't want you to have to choose between us, between me and them. But I can't pretend that we both don't belong to two different worlds." She looked at him, her gaze steady. "I've never belonged to that world. Not really. Not like I belong here with you." He took her hand, squeezing it tightly. "Then we'll make our own world. World where we don't have to choose." In the weeks that followed, things began to shift. The gardener continued to speak at conferences, to work on sustainability projects, to build his legacy. But he no longer sought the validation of the world that had once ridiculed him. Instead, he focused on what mattered most: the land, his work, and his family. His wife, too, found peace in this new life, one where she didn't have to live up to anyone's expectations but her own. In the end, the doubters, the ones who had mocked their love, their life, watched as the couple thrived, proving that love, hard work, and integrity could indeed overcome even the harshest of judgments. They had built something that couldn't be torn down by wealth, by power, or by the opinions of others. They had built a legacy together, one that was far more valuable than anything money could buy. And as for the heiress's family, they eventually came to realize that their love wasn't a fleeting thing. It was real, and it was something worth holding onto. They couldn't change the past, but they could respect the future her and her husband had created. In the end, the gardener and his wife didn't just defy the odds, they rewrote the story. The story of a man once mocked for his humble beginnings, and the woman who stood by him, choosing a life that was richer than any fortune could ever offer. And as the years went by, their story became one of inspiration, a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the belief that true wealth comes not from what we own, but from the connections we build and the legacy we leave behind. Their critics? They had long since stopped mocking. They had learned, in time, that sometimes the greatest victories come not from power or wealth, but from the quiet strength of a love that refuses to be shaken no matter what.